Daring to be different, Mormon women artists on the aesthetic frontiers. Women artists have often had to operate outside traditional modes and established conventions and institutions because they have not been welcomed there. And their social, political, and economic realities have meant that their training, working practices, access to professional networks, and so on have looked different. Well, I am in no way suggesting that we not work to eradicate these obstacles and conventions that have worked against the inclusion of women in these modes and venues. We got to keep trying to change these things, right? I do think these limitations have also forced women to think and act more creatively about their aesthetic theories and artistic practices. Constrictions can provide opportunities for growth. Not being included in the in club means that no one is going to care if you break their rules and go your own way. You might say that living off the grid has its advantages. A few years ago, I read an article that really resonated with this midlife menopausal woman with a strong interest in fashion. It was an argument the power of invisibility, of not having to follow the latest trends, or being obsessed with being looked at, as most are to be in their youth, and therefore being able to do important work. The author ended her essay with an image of an army of women in black yoga pants and tracksuits, middle-aged ninjas who were out there stealthily chipping away at the patriarchy. As I survey the history of Mormon women artists and advocates, I see similar dynamics at play. Because our presentations are meant to be brief, I can only highlight a few of these moments in which women have demonstrated that they are envisioning something beyond what the Mormon man artists and their supporters were doing. Instead, exploring unique topics and adopting non-traditional approaches to their art making that position them at the cutting edge and able to truly advance Mormon art and aesthetics. In 1920, Alice Merrill Horn, one of the most ardent art advocates the state of Utah and the Mormon Church has yet produced, made a bold claim for cultural authority, telling readers of the Relief Society magazine that God called her to this work as a young child, declaring, "If God spoke to Emma Smith concerning music and art, should not we, the recipients of benefits from that turning of the key, be glad to preach the gospel of beauty?" Eliza R. Snow heard the music and sang. She blessed me with a message of what I should do when I was but a little child. She blessed me with a message of what, in the presence of Sisters Zina, Bathsheba, Rachel Grant, E.B. Wells, and a dozen others I could name, she blessed me to bring forward a work which no one else could do and which would bring great joy in its accomplishment. That call has never since ceased. This was a mission which no one else could do, and with this blessing in charge, Alice in turn issued a clarion call to her fellow Latter-day Saint sisters to recommit to their God-given duty to serve as its guardians. A few years prior to this, Mabel Fraser had gently rebuked her LDS readers for not cultivating greater visual literacy among the saints, chiding, "We as a people are not yet fully awake either to the importance of an appreciation and knowledge of art or to our own ability to produce good art. Until we are awakened, whole communities at a time, until regardless of wealth or occupation, we as a people feel a need and make a united, purposeful effort, art in Utah will consist in the production of a few courageous artists who are making a discouraging struggle and who are rarely achieving their highest possibilities because they are not appreciated or aided. And the populace will lack understanding of the most basic form of human expression or power to let their own souls commune with it." 5 years later, she offered this vision of a distinctive Mormon art in her article, "The Art Value of Beehive Symbolism." Someday, the cultured people of the world are going to have the joy of learning about a new and wonderful art, and they will set it beside the Egyptian and Greek and the Gothic, and how wonderful it is, how much of good, how much of real, simple beauty, how much of the joy of righteous living and the love of God it expresses, they will say. And through their study of this art, many will learn of the divine philosophy which inspired it, the democracy under which its producers lived, and they will come to understand and love the gospel of Jesus Christ and to respect his followers. She urged these young women on, imploring, with your own hands, lay a part of the foundation for the last great art development of the world, the art of Mormonism, an art that must be as democratic as the gospel, an art which must consider the common things of life and must make more beautiful the most sublime things of our faith. Not a single man in the church has made such a bold and capacious claim for the possibilities of the art of Mormonism. Meanwhile, a young artist from southeastern Idaho has traveled to New York to study with one of the greatest American modernist artists of his age, Robert Henry. When Henry asked his young pupil, Minerva Teichert, if any artists had painted the Mormon story, she quickly replied, "Not to suit me." Henry's admonition kindled an interest that would deepen into a deep-seated testimony. It was her sacred calling to chronicle the history of the LDS Church and its people, from ancient scripture to the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ and immigration of the saints to Zion. In her eulogy for Alice Merrill Horne, one of her key benefactors, she would declare, "We must paint the great Mormon story of our pioneers. This story thrills me, fills me, drives me on. We will develop a style distinctly our own. We will tell our stories on the walls. The religious art should be rich in story and backed by faith." In her personal writings, she even prognosticated, quote, "The next great art of the world will be Mormon," end quote. These early 20th century women began their enterprise with tremendous faith in the future of the art of the LDS Church, and with sincere belief that women were destined to play a critical role in its development. And among their good efforts were hundreds of pages of writings on art about or in the Mormon faith. They had carved out a space where they could perfect their discipleship and assert authority and power as cultural emissaries. But that energy and enthusiasm was not sustainable in post-World War II American society and LDS church culture. Women's aesthetic authority eroded quickly with the entrenchment of conservatism and correlation. Babel Fraser, who in 1915 had praised the church's efforts for fostering the visual arts, would feel decidedly different about things in 1917 when she was interviewed by Richard Oman, church curator. Now, I need to offer a trigger warning of sorts. Mabel was known to speak her mind, and she offended a lot of people in the process of doing so. So, in her interview, she held nothing back when it came to church leaders and their lack of visual literacy. Oman asks, "Where do you feel the place of art is in the church today?" I think we have more stupid people running the church from the standpoint of an artist than I like to think about. They haven't any understanding. Why shouldn't a Mormon chapel be constructed and so decorated that the sighted as well as the deaf can get the gospel message? Will you tell me that? While there has been significant growth in making Mormon art more sophisticated and diverse, it is still a largely boys' club. Who is getting the vast majority of commissions for new church buildings and sites, and whose art fills those spaces? Men. We need to continue to play the long game of mainstreaming women artists into these arenas. This means filling in the branches of our artistic genealogy and making this tree known. We need to work to have more women historians and museum curators and archivists in positions in which they can effect change by raising awareness of these sister artists and preserving their accomplishments through written, visual, and digital records. We as a community must develop more professional networks and foster more supportive communities. But we also need to recognize that there is opportunity in operating outside of established systems. I believe that we are experiencing an acceleration and expansion in the LDS visual arts that we have heretofore never witnessed. 100 years after Alice Merrill Horne, Minerva Teichert, Mabel Fraser, and others were envisioning a powerful domain called Mormon art. And this is due in no small part to the swelling ranks of LDS women artists, educators, curators, historians, directors, and supporters who are committed to conjoining their faith in the powers of art, in the powers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and daring to be different. To me, the most promising Mormon artists are those who are working outside the traditional bounds of what is perceived as institutional Latter-day Saint art in both subject matter and style. Key examples of women artists who are daring to be different, to go against the grain, are Megan Gilman, whose work boldly embraces iconographies of other spiritual, philosophical, and theological traditions and addresses key social issues confronting the LDS Church. Or Melissa Shikamba and Kawani Povey Winder, whose Black Eve and Indigenous Heavenly Mother, respectively, are painted as women of color, resisting the whitewashing of the holy figures of the past and reclaiming a disappeared heritage. Or Sarah Lynn Lindsay, whose textile works explore the genealogies of mothers and daughters in visually and materially complex ways. Or Georgina Bringus and her installations that encourage both cerebral and corporeal engagement with memory, time, and space. Also, Nicole Woodbury Priest, who creates porcelain pieces that wed complex theological and scientific principles of design theory, and who founded the Certain Women LDS Art Invitational, a biannual art exhibition that promotes creative innovation and fosters professional development and community among Mormon women artists. There are many, many more, of course, who are doing the work to advance Mormon art and aesthetics in promising ways. Although often operating at the margins, what they are doing is anything but marginal. And for my money, it's women who are doing the more interesting and enduring work in the contemporary Mormon and Latter-day Saint art worlds. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Knobloch Geilman. I'm a CGU MFA candidate here at Claremont. And I'd like to start off by thanking the Richter Dissertation Fund in the form of the Crossing Boundaries Fellowship for initially funding this research. To give you a preface, my research is trying to find ways for artists and historians to speak to each other methodologically. And to give you something to look at while I talk, I will be including scenes from my self-portrait series that I've been working on for my MFA thesis here at CGU. Most of these have not been posted yet to social media, and some are about to be in a show that is going up in St. George on June 6th this summer. So if you're passing through or visiting, feel free to check them out. Um, Yeah, so some of you might know me as an artist. Historically, my work has been these scenes, photographed installations that are composited into digital collages that interrogate LDS history and social issues using symbolic objects and art historical reference as visual scaffolding. But today I would like to speak to you as a researcher as well. My research questions began when I noticed and realized there was too often a gap between art practice and academic work. I attended California College of Creative Arts and realized that there wasn't academics going on, and it was kind of horrifying to me. So I eventually made a home in the art education program at BYU, which I really enjoyed because it bridged a lot of art theory and art history and art practice in a really great way. It was also how I got introduced to the field of arts as research, and I found my love of academic conferences. I even resisted the idea of an MFA for a long time until I found this program at CGU, specifically because of its transdisciplinary focus and my ability to access really great academics while practicing as an artist and allowing the two to be incorporated together. And they had a Mormon studies program. Worked out very well. So, my research questions were what is the current state of arts-based research? How did the field of history become a formal academic subject and or develop professionalization? How is history disseminated to the public? And can art help in this process? And can art speak to other disciplines? And how have citations worked for history and other disciplines? Citations ground your argument in the field. To use a nautical term, the idea of reckoning or dead reckoning is a good metaphor. You are finding and establishing your place in the research. Without citations, you are just kind of floating out there. And one of the issues I found was that artists have no standardized way of citing their work or their research. I believe this reckoning, whether personal or academic, is agentic. It is a process of choosing and positioning yourself within a larger field. We can't know where we're going or how we're going to get there unless we first know where we are. And I've learned from Professor Bowman that methodology shapes the argument. So if we talk about a marketplace of ideas, a diversity of perspectives, I think we need to include a diversity of methodologies. So looking into the research and the field of arts as research, I came across a lot of interesting things, but one study by Michael Biggs and Daniela Buchler in 2010 outlined the two distinct cultures that the academic department, the arts departments, and the other academic departments kind of position themselves in. They said in their 2010 study of art schools outlined that there were two distinct subcultures, that of the academics and that of the creative practitioners. They noted that each subculture arose out of a distinct historical and social background in which its characterizing values were coherent within the subculture, but quite different when compared with the other. In short, universities are interested in building the body of knowledge and focused on publishing and using citations, where the art departments are usually focused on a market approach for artists to get into galleries, a very embodied knowledge and practice by doing, creative exploration, and subjective experiences. And Robin Nelson, a proponent of PAR, also known as practice as research, um, is a leader in this field. And I've noticed through his work and others that a lot of the focus on building legitimacy for arts as research is a focus on the practice of arts and not necessarily the product of art. So this took my studies into the field of history, and I wanted to know how history legitimized itself and how it became known as a field. And one thing I landed on was the use of footnotes. And here we have Anthony Grafton. He's become a historian of footnotes. And he said the historical footnote emerges not as a simple trademark guaranteeing quality, nor as a uniform piece of scholarly technology, but rather as the product of long collective struggles and individual efforts to devise a visibly critical form of historical writing. So the field of history didn't just fully emerge as we know it today. It took time and it took a process and took learning and figuring itself out. And it is still in this process, as are all academic departments. So I want to know, how can we bridge these two subcultures that seem to have very different goals? I chose to focus on history not only because I'm deeply passionate about it, but I feel like the two disciplines overlap quite a bit with their focus on the humanities, and I wanted to lower the barrier of entry to finding ways to build arts as an academic discipline. So a big thing to keep in mind, besides this, is that the footnote has become a really big product in this effort to discipline. It's how academics can cite back to original ideas and talk to other scholars in the field. And so the idea that I came up with was a post-praxis citation. I find this to be one idea, one possible solution I hope this is the beginning of a conversation, and I'm excited to see where it might go. I'm going to be working this fall with Dr. Bowman on publishing my research. So this is one of the pieces in my show, and I interrogated the Mormon Women Oral History Project here at CGU, which I thought would be entirely appropriate because if we're to have any success, it will largely be in debt to proponents of oral history and building alternate forms of history legitimacy. So I won't be reading through all the footnotes in this presentation, but this image and all the footnotes are up in the McManus Installation Gallery for the next 2 weeks. And if you want to reach out to me, my email is at the beginning of this slide deck, and I'm happy to share them. So I took an autoethnographic approach to work this out, again, trying to lower the barriers of entry um, as a Mormon woman and using the Mormon Women Oral History Archive. And I see this largely as a public history endeavor because art is meant to be viewed, experienced, studied, and shared. Um, so this is more of the footnotes. And again, my biggest argument is for the standardization of some sort of method where artists can speak to other disciplines and people can understand what we might be creating and the research and the work that artists put into their visuals. So there have been artists that have used archives, many, but again, there's no standardized way for artists to show their work. So, in my argument for post-praxis citation and etymologically translated, that's after praxis or after practice citation. So, I'm not trying to legitimate the process of creation, but the end product is then cited and people can link back to where you did your research. So I like this idea because it doesn't interfere with the artistic process. It can be standardized. It allows others to see the thinking behind different specific elements of the image. I'm not sure how this would work with three-dimensional work. This would be two-dimensional visual work. It points back to primary and secondary sources, but can also specify subjective experiences, much like discursive footnotes. All histories are in themselves primary resources, and this would just make a collaborative effort for artists in the creation of history. Obviously, we have the field of art history where historians are analyzing materially the art that is created, but I think artists are aware of what they're doing often and can share that with others. So again, this could potentially allow artists to participate in the larger goals of the university and to build knowledge. And also, since Western epistemologies largely rely on the written word, I feel a non-textual approach is another way to decolonize scholarship. Um, and thank you for your time and consideration.
I'm being recorded. If there's Mormon in the title, that's even better. Mormon women art, that's a good conference. And so through agency, it's all in there. So each of these scholars and artists has thought deeply about ways that visual culture shapes spiritual life, shapes historical memory, shapes forms of self-definition. And so I'm excited to talk about that today. McArthur, can we start with you? Sure. On the spot. Okay, what does art allow Latter-day Saint women to express that historical writing, theology, or institutional discourse can't?
Or being recorded?
Yeah.
For example, right now, currently, when we wrote our book, Girl's Guide to Heavenly Mother, I had to round up 54 pieces of art for the boys and girls guides to these books. And there were 5 in existence, that I could find. I was digging through everything trying to find. And thank you to the International Art Show that the church curates. I found a lot of artists who were working that I could reach out to. So I was living in India with very slow dial-up, and I would literally load one of the images from the Church International Art Show, which is online if you're not in a place where you can physically see it. And it would like pixel by pixel, like load up, right? I'd literally like read a book while it was loading. But what I found is this whole body of artists who are working in bold ways. And so I was able to tap into them. Now, Sarah Coyne, a professor at BYU, recently published an article, and now currently, 7 years after the Girls Guide, Heavenly Mother, and Boys Guide, Heavenly Mother were published, they stopped counting at over 500. There have been 500 images of Heavenly Mother art produced in a mere, like someone's like, clap for that, right? Clap for the artists. So to me, what is so pertinent about this is that we have artists who are choosing to show what our doctrine actually is, more so than, for instance, what our manuals currently reflect. That is incredibly powerful, that artists can be more nimble and for lots of different reasons, but that they can actually show doctrine in a way that is accessible. You can get it on Instagram, you can hang it on your wall, you can be sovereign in your choices. I mean, there's so many things that this artist explosion represents that I think is just, the power of that cannot be overstated.
Megan, what do you think? What does art allow Mormon women to express that other discourses can't?
I can only, can you hear me? Is this on? I can only speak to my experiences really, but I always joke that art is a way to yell without being loud. And so if I'm ever frustrated about something or wish more people were paying attention to it, I'm like, well, what can I make art out of? And channel my energies there. I think it's healthy.
I like that. Art is healthy. Good takeaway. Heather, I'm going to turn to you with a different question. How do we avoid flattening women's artistic production into either celebration or resistance narratives?
I mean, both of those things are good to do a measure of, but of course, as we know, artistic production is often a very individual and very vulnerable sort of thing. And I think that we need to honor that by seeing sort of other modes. So if it's not celebrating or resisting, it can be critiquing, right? It can be promoting or advocating. It can be, all of these other kinds of things. I think that we do fall into that trap often, not just in our culture, but in others of seeing it in that sort of way. I mean, I can just go and say years ago at the Certain Women Invitational, I think, was it on Heavenly Mother? It might have been the show on Heavenly Mother. And we had somebody in the audience stand up and say, well, there's no place for the Guerrilla Girls in this kind of venue. And I thought, wrong. What we need, is a bit more of that resistance, actually. And I guess I'd want to loop back to just say we don't actually talk a lot about resistance in our community as a whole. Right? We definitely move more to the celebratory. And so I would love to see shows that talk about subversion, resistance, pushing back, and the like, for what that's worth.
Thank you. Megan, I'm going to turn to you with a new question. What do you hope becomes newly visible when we take Latter-day Saint women's artistic practice seriously?
Just more. I don't know. I have been a member for 40 years now, and I was very familiar with the LDS visual canon for a very long time, and there was a few, Western United States white men, and so I am very excited for what's been happening, I'd say the last 10 years, and I just think more. Art resists binaries. Art resists. I don't think it's bad that art kind of pushes out of boxes. Again, I want to find ways we can work together, but just more, yeah.
Heather, what would you add? What do you hope becomes newly visible when we take Mormon women's artistic practice seriously?
And I think it would be the diversity and variety that is there. As we know, tend to pigeonhole certain art as being that's like temple worthy or church house worthy, or that goes here or that into these categories. And I'd really like us to be more capacious, I guess, in recognizing these traditions and bringing them to the forefront. So I think we're doing that. It's just going to take some time.
McArthur, what would you add?
Specifically women's contribution and lived experience and wisdom. So for example, in the LDS faith, we consider the Book of Mormon to be the most correct book. And it has 7 named women and hundreds of unnamed women. When you talk about who begets who, you have to have women in there. But from my standpoint, if we're labeling something the most correct, that almost entirely leaves out a female perspective, that there's a lot, and I'm not denigrating the Book of Mormon here. What I'm saying is there's room. There's room to expand the conversations. There's room to expand the experiences. There's room to expand what stories and what experiences we highlight. And women's art is so powerful in showing the piece. So one of my favorite pieces that's brought to the show was because we had a really wide range of art that was submitted to us. And I'm always interested in people like Rose Deckel-Dahl, who's an absolute, visual genius, and in someone who has never done a show before. So I walked into the gallery in Compass Gallery in Provo the first night they're hanging the show, and I walked to one of the pieces that I had curated in specifically because it was not as polished. It was not as sophisticated as some of the more experienced artists. And I'm standing there, like just being so pleased that it's hanging there. And a woman walks up, and it's the artist. And it's the first show she's ever been in. And she heard about the deadline 2 weeks before the show closed. And she and her best friend called each other up and challenged each other to participate in this. And know what she painted, if you go over to see the example here, is a woman bending down in prayer in her bathroom. And as she's telling me about this experience and that she'd flown in from the Midwest to see this, and her mom flew up from Texas to come see the show, I'm sitting there with a friend of mine and she breaks into tears. And she says, this is my life. This is my lived experience. So we have these scriptural records of men going to the hills, going to the mountains, pulling themselves apart in order to receive spiritual revelation. That is not the experience of the artist and my friend and often my life. I'm getting revelation like on my way to carpool. Right? Like I'm driving the car and my spirituality is happening mid-flow of my world. I'm not going off to the mountain for 40 days to get revelation, right? And so having, again, this and nothing wrong with going off the mountain and getting the revelation. That's not the problem. The problem is we have a multitude of spiritual experiences here and perspectives, and we need to embrace that all of those have validity and have just even exist. And so to me, this woman painted this piece that was so powerful because she captured the authenticity of many women's experience. And that was not present before.
It sounds like you just answered my next question. So I'm going to throw it to Megan, but I'll give you a chance to add if you want to. But can art communicate forms of knowledge that scholarship alone cannot?
Yes, I think so. And that is part of the reason I want to do this research, because I want artists to be able to speak to a wider audience. I want artists to be able to speak to the widest audience possible. And I want history to be more available to the widest audience possible. Your question again, sorry.
Yeah. What forms of knowledge does art communicate that scholarship alone cannot?
Other artist researchers talk about sort of like knowing through doing. And I think art as a process does that. I think the nonverbal communication that happens through an artistic work is powerful. And I think that can be well documented. People have experienced that. And that's sort of like emotional accuracy that an artwork can get to that maybe words can't achieve. I think is most important.
And I would also say the act of creation is divine. And so some people may be doing an MFA or create art, but all of us are in the process of creating something. We're at a bare minimum, we're creating our life. And so if you look at art as actually life creation, sometimes with a formal product and sometimes something less hang-upable on the wall. then I think it's really powerful to consider that all of us are creating that conversation.
Yeah.
And if I could just, can I just step in? Yeah,
Yes,
I was just
please.
going to say, and I think as viewers or spectators, we're also co-creators, right, with that meaning. And so that too, I have, very little natural talent as an artist, but I think that I'm gifted in being able to kind of receive and make meaning and then share those things with others. So I think that you can see that creative process from both sides.
Yeah. Can I ask you, just as a member of the Academy, Heather, and maybe this is just a plug for art history as a form of history cataloging.
Right.
What does art catalog that letters and diaries and journals don't?
In many ways, I kind of go back to that lived existence, kind of the materiality sort of it, right? And the kind of embodied corporeal, um, yeah, kind of nuts and bolts of this. I think most art historians, at least who kind of work in more theoretical modes in the last 50 years or so, would say, that a painting is a text, right? That it has all kinds of complicated things going on, that illuminates and that furthers kind of and so on. And so while I want to highlight its specialness, at the same time, I also want to say, it is useful to see it and kind of embed this in as valuable as a word, as a written document, because it is able to capture these things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I gotta say, we went faster through my questions than I thought we were going to. So if I could say just one question to think about it, what questions should we be thinking about next? Whether that's as scholars, whether that's as curators, whether that's as viewers. What questions should scholars, curators, and viewers be asking next as we think about Latter-day Saint women, as we think about agency? You guys are looking very thoughtful. Heather, can I throw that one to you?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of comes back to, I think that something that we've all addressed in some way is having greater confidence, I guess, and courage, not asking permission, trusting yourself, and whether that's in terms of subject matter or style or where you're going to show something or how you're going to talk about it, is having more of that courage and confidence. That's got to undergird what women are doing moving forward.
Megan, what are your thoughts?
I'm just thinking through the power of institutional support. All three of these women have helped me in my work and sharing and curating and talking about it. So there's power in that.
So dovetailing off of that, I was just thinking this is actually really personal for me right now. So I am going to be attending the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley starting this fall.
Oh.
And thank you.
Congratulations.
And but some of the really real questions is, how am I going to manage that financially and with the child, right? How am I going to do my time? How am I going to work a job? Like how is this all going to happen? And so for me, the really real questions about women participating and contributing is a lot around institutional support and logistics. And so if you're asking, like, what are the questions? Like, the question for me is, like, how do we catalyze more of this, right? How does that come into being? Because it doesn't come into being unless a painter can afford art. So one of the women who I know is the gallery told me that she was literally down to her last tube of paint. And if she did not sell a piece of art, she could not make any more, right? And so art cannot happen without financial support, logistical support, institutional support, welcoming artists, giving places for these artists to display. I mean, I think in my mind, the question becomes is, if we see that this is a powerful way to explore topics, agency being one of them, then how do we become catalysts to make sure that this landscape can flourish, right? How does it behoove each of us to do something to make this landscape flourish. And each of us can do one thing for sure. I mean, I could give you a list. But I think that understanding that this is a community lift is a really important idea. So how do we lift?
Beautiful. We've got time for questions. What questions do you have for these women? Yes.
I like the idea of footnotes because it helps helps me understand what the symbol is, where it really does enhance the viewer experience. Arthur Henry King said at one time, or maybe David said it, because when he writes a poem, he puts it out there, it doesn't belong to him anymore. Do you feel the same way? And what inspiration have you found, this is for all of you, in your art that you didn't know was there? How have you been inspired by your own art?
So I'll repeat the question. So one, we're a fan of Megan's footnotes, but like the idea of to know the symbolism and the artist intent, but then transition to who does art belong to at that point? And maybe if I extrapolate the meaning-making process, does it belong to the artist at that point? Does it belong to the viewer?
Both, definitely. I feel like my job as an artist is to build half a bridge. And I am so grateful for anyone that comes and whether they love it or hate it is actually engaging and looking at it. I feel like the attention economy, right, is our attentions are shrinking. And so I'm just grateful for any engagement. And I don't expect viewers to have sort of this knowledge and vocabulary and legacy of art history and visual symbols. And that, maybe that's the problem with the public education system or what, but I think that can be learned and we can grow and do better in communicating and teaching that and learning it and having a richer art experience. That's what I hope in the future.
I just had a very satisfying moment as an artist. So I walked into the gallery to see Megan's good work, hanging up all the pieces and getting this thrill of getting to see these friends that I'd worked with over the last few months. And there was a woman and her friend standing in front of my piece. And they were centering her face on the mirror so that they could take a picture of her face in the mirror with the halo of beads around her. And it was that moment of creation that is exactly what I wanted to have happen, right? The reason the mirror is there is so that the viewer gets to have that co-creation moment and have this like thrill of knowing that she is divine and that sovereignty can be worked on in hers. And so watching as an artist, having the thing happen is just deeply satisfying, right? Like that is
very satisfying. I would say, like, to more specifically answer your question, that yes, when that has happened, when I've been in a gallery setting and someone has been like, oh, were you thinking about this when you put these two things together? And sometimes I'm like, yes, absolutely. Sometimes I'm like, no, but that is totally in line with the pieces of the work. And I love it. Please, can I share it? And that's just a really powerful moment.
Heather, do you have any thoughts to add?
About intentionality and meaning. I mean, it's and co-creation. I mean, I think it's just simply, people will theorize and say, how can a person never know their intentions? How can they, from a Freudian perspective or a Marxist perspective or a Darwinian perspective or something. And so that intentionality is only goes so far, and this idea that once it leaves Megan's studio, it belongs to everyone else too, and that they're going to bring their associations, they're going to bring their past histories, their engagement, their whatever to it, and make an entirely different piece than what was intended to go out there. And some, like me, think that's a beautiful thing, and others think that's frightening. Right? Like, I so didn't want that going there, and yet here it has. But that's wonderful. I mean, again, for me, because it allows for that multiplicity and yeah.
Good. Other questions? Yes.
I'd love to know, as you approach art from a spiritual perspective as well, how does receiving revelation influence what you create or how you create it?
Oh, good. So as you approach art from a spiritual perspective, how does revelation influence what you create? Yes? Or how you create?
So for me, at least, those are not two separate things. So like revelation and creating art are not two separate things, they're one thing, right? So that when I'm personally creating a piece, it's maybe the most blissed out place I can exist in, right? Like my husband will complain that like 5 hours goes by and like I don't even realize. And so for me, this communion with the divine is exactly what is happening as I'm creating. I'm putting myself in almost this eternal, timeless space. And so for me, at least in the act of creation, those are one thing. Then what do I do with it from there and how do I move it? That's when I can feel the gap. And that's when I start to say, okay, what do I do with this space? Do I work with Caroline? Do I put my time here? Do I put on a show? Like that's when I come to you're over there and I'm over here and I'm asking a question to know how to walk that path. So what I do with it becomes an interchange, but when I'm creating it, there's no gap there, right? It's just, that's how it's working.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of distinction. And I think artists throughout time would also comment that art is a spiritual process. So I don't think that's a new idea or alone to LDS art. And it's exciting and it's fun. And it's when that idea that comes into your mind that you're like, I know I worked on the ingredients for this idea, but I needed some help beyond this corporal realm to help me get there. And I don't think we have an idea about like ultimate reality. And so whatever is going on the other side is helpful. And I think it's exciting and I don't know, it's a wonderful process and it's really uplifting and great.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Other questions? Yes.
So when you're approaching art, there's always this conversation between the artist and the viewer, as many of you have mentioned. However, some of the viewers, especially Mormon art, don't have context, which is why I do love how Megan has her post-praxis citation. However, how can Mormon women artists balance the aesthetic stewardship of Mormon art? How can they have latitude in the art that they're creating to convey ideas that are spiritual, that tell stories about being a part of the church and also experiencing spirituality within its context? And also, more importantly, the institutional patronage of the arts, because again, like you said, there cannot be art unless there is patronage, and you kind of have these limits for what you can create because you are representing the church that many viewers will not have context for, and so you have to balance the context of what the church would like to present to the world and what you would like to present to the world. So how do you do that? I don't know how to ask that question. I'd love to.
Let me repeat it.
Oh, yes, repeat it.
And then I'll
get
recuse
to it.
myself from this answer.
Yeah, right?
Just easy. So the thoughts, conversation about artist and viewer and reaching your viewer. So if we're looking at the wider art market, some viewers don't have the context to fully understand Latter-day Saint artistic production. So you have maybe a market that is a Latter-day Saint audience, but then you have this aesthetic stewardship of art that has been previously patronized by the church. At least this is what I'm hearing. And so how do you find, one, the latitude to tell stories about, sorry, that means I was going to stop asking my questions. How do you find the latitude to tell stories about being a Latter-day Saint woman while also trying to balance, this is what the institutional church is patronizing? Did I accurately summarize your question? Okay, yes.
Okay, I'm going to say like I don't have a good answer for that, but it's a problem I'm sort of working through right now, because I wanted to go to, I was in this pond, right, in Utah, and I threw myself out of that pond into a much wider artistic world. And I can't say yet that I've been successful, but I was curious to see if like I could communicate to a wider audience. And I want to keep making quote unquote Mormon art. I don't think I need to stop doing that. And part of that is because I haven't given myself the assignment to be a spokesperson for the church. I'm not trying to make a career out of getting into Deseret Book or I have been supported institutionally, but I didn't make that a goal. And I think J. Kirk Richards has spoken to this. I think a lot of artists can get really frustrated and hurt when they try to make that a goal. And I think your job as an artist is to make art and to express your unique perspective. And so, yeah, sorry, but answer the question. But we can only do what we can do. And our job of an artist also is to hold a mirror to society and just generate questions and conversations. And yeah, I don't know that's their job to be the spokesperson.
So I know of artists who've handled this in different ways. I know of one artist who has 2 different names, and the Mormon art that they present is under one name, and they're very successful in that sphere. And the art that they produce that they would say would go to a different audience, they have a completely different name. And their art functions under a different brand, basically. And so in that way, they have a very hard split, right? That was their solution. I have, with my personal art, one of the shows that I did was actually with a Hindu and Muslim, and me as a Christian LDS. And so I had to find ways that my art would flow between those, right? And so it was fascinating to be in a room and in conversations that we do not have a shared foundation to start from. So, and in some ways you have to have a thick skin. So one of my early books was talking about how Eve made a good choice, that she was being a sovereign being when she did this. And when we pushed this book out to a wider audience, that was not an acceptable idea, right? And so sometimes as an LDS artist or any artist, you have to have a thick enough skin to say, I'm going to stand by what I've created, and it may work for some people and it may not. And it may not work for some people within the LDS faith either, right? So I think part of becoming an artist is simultaneously like co-creating and ignoring. Like there's a certain amount of ignoring you have to do to be able to create something that someone may not like or appreciate or have really hard things to say about. Okay.
Heather, as a scholar and patron, would you add anything to that?
I think, I mean, it's a really important question, and those were 2 excellent answers. I'm just thinking about, if artists see themselves as being missionaries of sorts, they're going to have different approaches and perspectives that are going to draw in different kinds of prospective members for what it is, right? So, I mean, the question about representing the church to me is I think if you're authentic to kind of your position and your perspective and your journey, that's going to resonate with certain people. And that could be enough. So I mean, but yeah, I think that there's we said there's a tension, there's a huge tension there, and it's difficult to please all masters, right?
Yes.
Would you compare the LDS community receptivity to art with other faith communities or with culture in general? I think that in Utah, you've got Springwater Museum, you've got Templars, you've got one in Ogden, you've got one in St. George that I don't know about. There are Latter-day Saint artists around with studios. So how does our culture compare with other faith cultures and with American society in general? Are we more receptive to art? Are we not?
So the question is, how would you compare the LDS community's receptivity to art versus other faith cultures or the larger American culture?
So I had an artist friend who moved from Utah to Portland, Oregon, and that's where I live. And Portland is supposed to be famous for its art scene. And she said it was not anywhere near as robust as what Utah was. And the amount of support and the amount of artists helping one another, and the amount of mentorship and the convenience. So you listed galleries, but there's always kind of back conversations, right? Artists supporting artists, trying to, setting up academies. I mean, there's so much support that's just really flourished in that physical location. I think it's pretty amazing, but it's also only one location. And so I don't want to say that the entire LDS Mormon art experience is only Utah. I mean, one of the things that struck me about what Vinny was talking about is that some of the people that she was interviewing had no idea about things that were happening with these, what we were calling worldwide celebrations. They had no idea, right? So you get a little bit navel gazing when you think that the art scene is only happening in one place. So I think that's problematic. So good that it's flourishing, good that there's a lot of robust things happening, bad that we're navel gazing, right? So you have both of those happening. I love the book. My Name is Asher Lev. I don't know if you've read this one, but it's about this man who has an insane artistic talent and how he has to navigate that within a very Orthodox Judaic Hasidic faith, right? And so I loved that conversation. And I read it years ago, a decade plus ago, but with this idea of how do you navigate who you are when who you are may not fit your community. And I think that lots of LDS artists have wrestled with that same question.
Let's go. I think you've had hand up a while. I'm sorry, I've missed it.
Yeah, it's okay. Good arm.
Yeah. Get a good bicep there.
Yeah, right. This is a question more for everybody. I mean, I know we're talking about the intelligibility of LDS art to others, right? Or Mormon art to others. I'm also kind of interested to know why is it that the challenge that Megan pointed out was the gap in some academic disciplines art, which kind of has, there's definitely tension between those two disciplines. So how did that happen? From right now where you're looking at it, what complications does that present? And how did that strain grow so much? But it's scrutiny on both sides.
I think it's just dipped.
Sorry, I'll repeat.
Yeah.
How did the gap between academic disciplines and art arise? What are some of the tensions?
Like I mentioned in my talk, they're two different cultures and they had two different goals. And the arts were not always under a university model. I think I'm glad they are. So that's something I'm still diving into the research on. But that like the quote said, there's two different subcultures. The arts are market focused, gallery work, presenting subjective experiences, and different disciplines within the university system are under the guise of objectivity.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think we're at a good moment, I think, to bring in the arts under. We recognize sort of the trying to nail Jello to a wall. I think Peter Novick said on the question of objectivity. So I'm excited.
There's a question back there. Yep. And I saw one more, and this will be our last question. Back there. Yep, that's you, Maria.
Love both of your work. What would you say for a beginning artist who's entering into this discovered world of opportunity after being exposed to? Because I feel like just like the B1 concert and that young lady who was then you get so excited, but then you can feel overwhelmed because we're talking about the women who are trying to be able to have the same opportunity as the men of the gospel. How can they going into that field or really support themselves as they're learning to gain a community, and
how to, per se, have a thicker skin spiritually. What have you learned entering into it that you've done for yourself? Visualize, but also how to find your connection, how to find your people that support you and lift you up.
Yes, and I know you live here in California, so I know starting out that's hard. I was in Orange County actually when I started making my scenes, and it wasn't until I got to Utah that I could start exhibiting because there was an actual audience for what I was doing. So that is difficult, but as McArthur mentioned, like the LDS arts community is really collaborative and really helpful. I have heard from others that, you know, it's so cutthroat in other places, that being an artist and trying to get into shows, it's very competitive. And I love that about the Utah art scene. And I'm trying to expand that outside of Utah. And I'm also on the hunt for other contemporary religious artists. I would like to, I'm sure we're not the only ones like doing cool things. So I'm personally on the hunt, but you can still make those connections, I think, even if you're not in Utah. And Instagram is a great tool for that. And, you know, there are opportunities to submit to shows in Utah that you can ship to. But that building that network and asking for advice is probably my biggest recommendation.
We're going to give McArthur the last word on how do you support, what would you say to a new incoming artist?
So when I or my friends have spotted a hole, our reaction is to step into it. So if you want to see artist enclaves, you put them on. If you want to gather artists, you start to gather artists. So if you want to build connections, you ping everybody in your possible network and you say, hey, everybody, I'm going to do this. Like, we're going to come meet at my house on Thursday and we're going to eat ice cream and we're going to talk about how hard it is to be an artist. And so if you want to see something that doesn't exist, you make it exist.
With that spirit of building Zion in heart, we'll finish there. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We are now on our lunch break. We have a catered lunch right outside the doors here. It's going to be like Italian themed. And there will be an art workshop optional at 1:15. It does involve like a little box of materials, which I will put out on the table over there if you would like to come. I only have about 50 boxes though, so FYI. Okay. All right. Go enjoy lunch. Oh, by the way, in terms of where to eat lunch, you can eat it here, but there's also some beautiful places outside. You'll find tables out there. If you go across the parking lot, there are a bunch of tables with some covering. So you can spread out, eat lunch wherever you want, including in here.
Would be lunch.